Okay, so first I'm going to read a little disclaimer. This podcast is not intended to treat, diagnose, prevent, or cure any condition. This is not to be construed as medical advice from Dr. Dennis or SelfHacked. These are simply our opinions to be used for educational and entertainment purposes only. Presently, the ICES device is not FDA approved, and you should consider this technology to be entirely experimental. All right, and now let's begin. This is Dr. Bob Dennis. Bob has a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, a Master's in Kinesiology and Biological Engineering from the University of Michigan. He also received a PhD in Biomedical Engineering from the University of Michigan as well. He was an independent technical consultant for NASA and also a retired fire chief in North Carolina. He also recently joined the editorial board for the new Journal of Comprehensive Integrative Medicine, which will publish its first issue of scientific papers in alternative and integrative medical scientific research in spring 2018. He is currently an associate professor at the School of Medicine and College of Arts and Sciences at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He is the founding chair, Curriculum in Applied Sciences and Engineering, CASE, at UNC Chapel Hill. He has also held faculty positions in mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and was a visiting scientist in the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT and the Harvard-MIT Health Sciences and Technology program. It's a great intro. And
thanks.
So I'm going to explain a little more about Joe and his experience with ICES. So Joe has great experience with the ICES device that Dr. Dennis created. It helps him with brain fog, fatigue, and food sensitivity. You can see Joe's personal accounts and how he uses the device on our ICES posts, which we'll link to in the show note. We also did a long-form interview with Dr. Dennis previously, where Joe asked his questions. For this podcast interview, we are addressing reader questions about the ICES device and technology.
My name is Nata, and this is Alex. We're both biohackers, and Joe's sidekick at SelfHacked.
So are we good to go?
We are good to go.
Yes, you're good.
So I'd like to start with just a general statement that I'm really very happy to be here again talking to the self-hackers. And most of the really helpful suggestions and user information that I get are from readers of SelfHacked, from Joe's readers and people who watch. So the new devices that I've designed are largely in response to the questions that people have asked from SelfHacked and to suggestions that people have made. So when we're talking about the technology development, really in the last 2 years, the self-hacking community has had a really big impact on the direction that this technology is going.
All right. So for the first question, can you remind us of how this device works?
Well, you know, the electromagnetic way that works is that it generates a very, very controlled electromagnetic pulse where the slope of the magnetic field going up and going down forms a sort of a narrow trapezoid. And the key thing about it that and I'm starting to publish this now, is that the slope of the magnetic field is what matters the most, I think, in any PEMF system, including mine. What ICES stands for is inductively coupled electrical stimulation. So the inductive coupling is an idea that goes back to about 1974 or so, where we're trying to get electromagnetic energy deep into tissues without using electrodes and without, you know, having to drive current directly through skin or anything like that. So the electromagnetic way that ICES works is that it uses induction to get electromagnetic energy deep into tissues, where it transforms into a micro nano current, and then it stimulates tissue that way. It's a really efficient way, maybe 1,000 times more efficient, for example, than microcurrent stimulation, to get really small currents deep into tissues and then to stimulate large volumes of tissue. So there's a lot of calculus involved, but when you do the math and the physics, what you find is it's just really an efficient way to electrically stimulate. That's the sort of the physics description of what's going on. The biological description is, aside from the fact that we know, because we can calculate that there is an electric microcurrent, We don't understand the molecular biophysics of why that should have a response. So if you're asking from a biological standpoint, why is it that ICES works or PEMF works? Most of the information you can get on the internet, I think, is just kind of marketing hype. You know, as a scientist, I can tell you I've reviewed every paper that there is on PEMF. Looked at them and I've read them and I've studied them. I've been working in this area for 20 years, and I can tell you there are some hypotheses to how it may work biologically, but it's not fully explored. And I think that there's maybe a couple of Nobel Prizes worth of biological research just to figure out how it is that cells and tissues can detect these microcurrents and respond in the special ways that they are responding to PMF and ICES. You know, I mean, I would tell you more if there was more known, but I think the honest answer is we don't really know for sure.
Oh, so has your theory of how your device works, has it changed over the years?
Yeah, it's gotten more and more specific. So, you know, scientifically, it's okay to start with a theory, but then you need to reduce that theory into testable hypotheses. You say, okay, so I have a theory about something and it says it works this way. But science really kicks in when you can make predictions, and you do that with a testable hypothesis, which means, okay, if my theory says it does something, then what you do is you boil it down to a hypothesis that makes a prediction. Well, if it's doing that something, then maybe I can measure that specific outcome. And ideally, you would measure an outcome that would tell you whether or not your hypothesis was right. And so what I've been working on, trying to formulate scientific hypotheses about what it does and how it works, that will help me narrow down two things, right? One of them is the clinical question. What is it doing for people, right? And the other one is the basic scientific question, you know, at sort of a quantum or a molecular level. Why is it having an influence on itself? So I've made some progress in that, but those are both really difficult problems. And I think we've made a lot more headway just because I talk to a lot of clinicians. I'm probably actively talking to maybe 150, 170 different clinicians who use this, and several hundred active users who give me feedback all the time. I think the best insights into the science of what PEMF is and what this my technology, a certain form of PEMF, yes, is. The best information is coming from people giving me feedback to what it's doing. So I've kind of changed my mind on this really in the last few years. I've gone away from thinking, well, I have to understand the molecular biophysics of it. And I've come to realize that what you really need to understand are what are the biological effects. And then when you collect this information widely enough, then you can start to make when you start to see patterns, like why should one thing, PEMF, have an impact on urinary incontinence and chronic pain and traumatic brain injury and nerve disease and orthopedic injury? Why should one thing have a benefit for all of those things? Well, what's the thread that kind of connects all of those? And it's one of these things that, you know, Joe and I have talked about, and it's this, you know, cell danger response that involves an inflammatory and a metabolic change in the way that cells function that sometimes goes wrong. And so when you get an injury, sometimes you can have a response where your body just grips onto it, how it wants to respond to that injury, and never lets go. So you can get these chronic states of dysfunction metabolically and in terms of inflammation. So my theory on how ICES works and how PEMF works is that it helps to reset that pathologic cell danger response. How exactly it does that at a molecular level, we don't know, but every shred of evidence that I've ever gotten clinically from either clinicians or users points right back to that response.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that cells get stuck in the cell danger response and ICES can help to reset that?
Yeah, so people tend to use like one word, like it's an inflammatory response, right? But PEMF and ICES do, you know, ICES does something different, the inflammatory system, than aspirin or NSAIDs do. Otherwise, you know, you wouldn't need PEMF, right? You just take some aspirin. So inflammation is this big, complicated response with all these feedback loops. It seems to be doing something different within that big inflammatory response than an NSAID would do, or other sort of chemical inflammatories do. And what it seems to do, what EMF broadly seems to do, is it seems to break this feedback loop, pathologic inflammation, where cells and tissues get stuck, and it sort of lets them reset. You get like a metabolic reset, you get like just a swelling goes down. And this isn't a guess. I mean, the swelling part, I mean, I've measured that to highest scientific standards available, and I can show you repeatedly, we know that's what's happening. It's just a different mechanism than the chemical mechanism. So, you know, we have a pretty good handle on what it's doing biologically, and it seems to be essentially resetting, allowing the body to reset itself back to a state where it can.
Okay, great. So for the audience, the cell danger response is a phenomena described by Robert Naviaux. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Robert Naviaux.
Naviaux of UC San Diego. So it basically says that many modern chronic diseases, including tough ones like autism and chronic fatigue, stem from the cell's own protection against virus infections, which can be sensed when something in the cell steals high energy like electrons, or steals high energy electrons like NADH to make their own energy. This causes the mitochondria to reduce its function and that the cell to secrete ATP to warn other cells that danger is going on.
So that's, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so that's an excellent introduction to it. And he's talking about sort of the metabolic aspects of cell danger response. And I thought I'd kind of make it a little bit more general so people can understand it, right? If you imagine humans during the evolutionary sequence for the last several million years, right? When you're in the jungle, the proximal threat from an injury, the thing that threatens your life the most immediately, is an infection, right? So if you've got a broken bone and you can't hunt or you can't gather food, yeah, that's going to kill you in a couple of weeks. But if you fall out of a tree or something and you get a cut, an infection can kill you within a day or so. So there's an evolutionary pressure to heal, primarily first by having a really, really powerful autoimmune response to prevent infection. And this is a really common thing. They've done studies on like orangutans and stuff in the wild, and by the time these great apes get to be adults, about 40% of them have already had a major bone broken. Like, injuries are really common in the wild, and the evolutionary pressure has been to respond to that with this overwhelming inflammatory metabolic response to prevent, just throwing every resource the body has to prevent infection. Now, fast forward to really the 19th and 20th century, we realize, we deal with sanitation, clean water. We have all these behavioral responses now, right? We have antibiotics. We have all of these things that we do. We just keep a clean environment. We tend to have things in our environment not be sharp and dangerous. There's all these kinds of little things that we do that make infection a big killer anymore. And intellectually, we know that's true, right? But as an organism, we don't. So we still respond to every injury or perceived injury as an immediate threat to our survival. And this explains a lot of things. I think that this response is much broader than just metabolic. I mean, you can think about like road rage, right? Psychological response. It's a fight or flight response that people have as if their life were threatened because somebody pulled in front of them on the freeway, right? I mean, I used to live in Los Angeles and I've seen it. You don't see it so much down south.
All the time.
People are like, because I used to live in El Segundo, but people down south here where I live, we're a little bit more laid back. But I remember, the road rage thing, and that's people responding in this primal way to a threat that's not even there, right? So we do it in a psychological way, which of course this cell danger response is mediated by the brainstem. We do it metabolically, and we do it in the inflammatory system. And so that's not the healthiest way to respond in a modern world, is it? And so what I think EMF is doing for us is it's allowing at least the inflammatory portion of that response, that unnecessary pathologic inflammatory response, to be normalized, switched off.
Cool.
Right?
So how does this work with things like autoimmune diseases like MS and Hashimoto's?
Well, I kind of like to go down the list and just give really, really honest answers. You guys had sent me a list, and can I just sort of tick them off and tell you what I think we know?
Yeah, you can do
Would
it.
that work? So if we look at autoimmune diseases like MS and Hashimoto's, many people ask me about MS, not so many about Hashimoto's, which is viewed as kind of a rare disease, just a few hundred people, although it's really serious for them. It's just not as common as MS. The honest answer is I don't know whether or not it works for that, but the one or two people who've told me they've tried PEMF, not just what I make, I'm trying to give you the honest answer, PEMF in general seems to be helpful, right? Probably because it's helping to switch off this pathologic inflammatory response that's doing so much damage to the nerves, central and peripheral nervous system. Crohn's and colitis, that one's kind of a mixed bag. My sister suffered from Crohn's and it didn't help her at all. Other people that I know who've suffered from Crohn's, they say it actually gives them quite a bit of relief. I'd say it's kind of like a 40-50% hit or miss, and I don't understand why. It may be how people are applying it, or it may just simply be biological diversity. Rheumatoid arthritis, people tell me that it works really well for that. But you have to remember, right, the reason I designed this system the way I've designed it is because I had a really, really bad back injury as a firefighter on a rescue. It kind of really, really damaged my back, and it's caused a lot of sort of a pelvic, lower spine pelvic degenerative problem that I've had now for about 10 years. So the reason I designed the system was to stop that degenerative process and to deal with the pain, because I was really heavy on all the opioids and all the problems. And so drug free now, right?
Yeah.
But that's what it's designed for, but I don't know if it works for other things. So largely, going down the list, it kind of comes down to self-experimentation, and I'll just tell you what people tell me and what I've observed. So anyway, Nada, you were going to say something?
So when it's like a systemic inflammatory response, how do you suggest they use it? Or how did the people who get the results put the coil and how long they use it?
That's an excellent question. So I've been working with many doctors about this, because they'll say, well, do they need a whole body mat? And, because their whole body hurts, or they're having this whole body systemic response. Mm-hmm. And it kind of seems to split into two things. Some people who do have a whole systemic problem probably do need a whole body mat. And that's something I'm working on, but I want to keep the prices down and want to keep the energy really down. And I've really sort of focused on the mobile systems in the market, which really weren't there until I started making them, I think. Didn't really know of any good ones. Now there's some copycats, and that's good because I like the competition. These other kids, I'll keep me even more honest than I want. But I'm trying to come up with an affordably priced whole body one. But that's what I can tell. It's only about 5% of the people who have systemic inflammation. What I think is happening in most cases, and this is what happened to me, was when I was in high school, I broke my tailbone. And over the years, that sent out sort of a pro-inflammatory beacon that eventually took over my whole system. So what I've been finding working with clinicians is you can find that initial injury. And a lot of people, it's, in their late 30s or early 40s, they'll have an injury that never quite heals. And that's the one you want to focus on. So a lot of people, it's a shoulder or a knee or a foot or their lower back, right? And the story is almost always the same. It's like, well, I struggled with that for 5 or 10 years. It never went away. And now everything hurts, right? Mm-hmm. So they want to treat their whole body. But probably 90 to 95% of the time, if you just really thoroughly treat that first injury and you shut off the pro-inflammatory beacon that's coming from it, within another week or two, the rest of the body just normalizes. Now, I see that about 90 or 95% of the time. I love to study this. It's really hard to study. But the suggestion I give to clinicians is take a really thorough, medical history and try to zoom in on that first chronic injury a person had, and then sort of treat that until it goes away, and then keep treating it for a couple of weeks. Most of the time, people really, really respond. Now, there's a 5 or 10% that don't, and in that case, I usually tell them, well, my products aren't really the right ones for you. You want to get a whole body PEMF, but I hate doing that because those things are really expensive, right? Hopefully I'll fix that problem too before too long. You want me to keep going down the list, or do you got something? So gut inflammation, leaky gut, IBS. Once again, this one's a hit or miss. Probably a third to half of people say it helps them. IBS more so than leaky gut, I think. Skin problems that have systemic inflammation as a root, haven't seen a lot of feedback on that, so I can't really answer that one. Anxiety, depression, psychosis, or schizophrenia. Well, what's really interesting about all of those is that there's actually an FDA-approved device called a transcranial magnetic stimulator, TMS, and it was this device that was made to stimulate like your brain and cause depolarization in your brain. You can actually make a person twitch or slur their speech. They used it. But what they discovered was that when they use it on the prefrontal cortex on the left side of a person's brain, it's actually an excellent treatment for depression. FDA approved. And it is actually just a PEMF, pulsing PEMF device that's specifically made for using on people's brains. Yeah. If you want to understand that one, look up the literature on TMS. FDA approved for that, but of course only the FDA approved devices are approved for that. But in my new products that I've made to try to help people out, because a lot of people ask me about that, you get like the model M1. I actually have 2 of these TMS simulator protocols that people can use, and a couple of people have tried it. It really helps them with these kinds of things that the FDA approved, big, expensive approved one can do. The interesting story about that is that it was FDA approved for use at very, very high power. And if you read the literature, most clinicians say, well, yeah, it's probably like way too much power to get the clinical benefit. So much so that people actually, the major side effect in about 0.5% of the people, seizures. So what my device does is it actually uses the low power level that everybody agrees probably would work better, but it's not FDA approved. So you can do self-experimenting on that with like the model M1.
So just quick question, Bob. So for IBS, I also heard it's a condition with both the neural and like the gut component. So where do people put the coil? Do they put it on the gut, or is it like another place in the body?
Well, this is the thing. People do actually try different things, and oftentimes you have a symptom in a location in your body that's not really where the problem is. You see this, for example, with referred pain all the time, right? You might have pain in your leg, problems in your spine.
Right.
So I don't have enough information, but people who have tried transabdominal, placement of the coils, or they use a 2x2 coil array you can get from us, or they use one of the bigger EMF machines. What they tell me is it helps with IBS, and I think it helps that component of IBS where you just have this chronic inflammatory problem that is related to a lot of gut problems, and by reducing the inflammation in the gut and the gut's very regenerative, so it only takes a few days for the cell layers on the inside of the gut to regenerate. So it's one of those things that if it works, boy, you get a really good response with it. I wish I knew more about it. So I'll just keep going down the list, right?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Back to the TMS. What is the best place on the head to stimulate for anxiety and schizophrenia?
Well, we don't know about anxiety or schizophrenia. We know a lot more about depression. And
okay.
if you go to my webpage, I actually have a link to some clinical papers on this that show right over the left prefrontal cortex, which is
prefrontal. Okay.
Yeah, left prefrontal cortex is what they have approved. Joseph uses it differently, and different people actually use it differently. But the approved devices are left prefrontal cortex, which is about like if you go diagonally up from the left ear, it's about an inch and a half up. But it kind of varies. And if you get it wrong, if you go a little too far back, you can actually get the premotor area. And with the really powerful TEMF systems, you can cause seizure, right? Because that's what it does, right?
Yeah.
And you can put it over different areas of your brain and slur speech and do different kind of things like that. But now with our device, my device is really, really low energy, so it doesn't actually cause a depolarization. But it still seems to be people tell me it works very well.
But so for the brain kind of issue, does it have to be pointed directly at the part of the brain, or is it something that you can like roughly place somewhere and get the effect?
I think in the case where you have a specific lesion that you could see on an imager, which is almost never, right? But in that case, you'd want to have a really good aim. But for the most part, the brain is like this kind of tight compartment inside your cranium, right? And a lot of the problems just have to do with generalized inflammation. So like a generalized placement of the coil seems to work really well. We've actually done, I'll get to it in a few minutes, we've done some tests for traumatic brain injury. We're just transcranially, front and back, transtemporally, transoccipitally, and even at the base of the spine, at the base of the brain, side by side, all seem to work about the same. So, if it's like a generalized brain thing, you don't have anything to aim at, right? So you just want to get as much of the volume of the cranium as you can.
Can I ask a question too? You can.
Sure.
For some reason. I was just reading about a transcranial device for anxiety and depression called the David Delight Pro. Are you familiar with that? And
I am not familiar with that specific one, no.
It's a TC whatever device, and then you put on goggles with the flashing lights, and that's
right. Mm-hmm.
The two, and then brainwave entrainment music. It's supposed to be very powerful, but it's expensive, and I've been kind of struggling with.
Well, I think those things are really interesting. I've been studying that, both the optical ones as well as the electromagnetic brain entrainment for a long time. The device that I have, the M1, even though I've optimized it for like the severe chronic orthopedic pain, many people who are readers of the SelfHacked website have asked me, can you put in different brainwaves? And so I've actually put in protocols for brainwave entrainment for all of the major known brainwaves, alpha, beta, delta, all of them. So they're all sort of built in there, and get a lot of really, really positive feedback from people. They're like, wow, this is really, really, really great.
What is this device?
So it's the one that I sell. I'm not a salesman. I'm a scientist, but
This one.
We have it right
The
here.
M1 device. We have it right here. So.
There you go. Yeah. It's I don't want to try to sell you something. I want to sort of make available to people who want to do self-hacking a scientific tool, and that's what that is, right? So that's the one I wear actually for my lower back problems. I'm wearing one right now, and it works really well for that.
N1D1. I just joined, so I'm a little late.
Oh, it's model M1 is the one that's got all the features packed into it. It's the latest design that I have. It's the most portable. It's not the least expensive one, but in my opinion, I think it's close to the bottom in terms of how expensive it is, because we have some stuff that's more expensive for like serious research purposes. But I think M1 is the one that you'd be interested in if you wanted to do a bunch of different self-hacking experiments like brainwave entrainment, PMS stimulation, fixed frequency stuff for different kinds of applications. The M1 is what you want.
Oh, thank you, Robin. So for the audience, we would like to get through the list of conditions that we get in the survey, which is quite comprehensive. And then if that doesn't address your questions, we're gonna open the floor to you guys so that you can ask your personal questions.
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, no worries.
No problem.
So let me kind of go through the list and just sort of check them off if that's okay. So we were at soft tissue injuries, and if especially things like ligaments, tendon, muscle, and even skin, we've had much better response with that than I thought we would. It's not really, didn't really design it for that. I was more looking at orthopedic heart disease. But in particular with like skin ulcers and stuff, I'm working with a doctor, for example, who's in the sort of the jungles of India, and he deals with all kinds of jungle ulcers. And we use it for that, and he's tried everything else, but it works even in places where hygiene and well, not hygiene, but sepsis is a problem. Clean water is a problem. They don't have electricity, and this is really helping a lot of people. It's making the open wounds kind of go away. And I'm working with the United States Navy right now to set up skin wound regeneration experiments. In fact, I just got an email from them today, so I'll probably be working with university with Kansas State rather on some injury stuff in animal models. But it's very interesting, and I think the potential is really there. I just haven't had time to gather as much information about it. Migraines, this is one of those things that's a yes and no. Dr. Bill Pollack thinks it works splendidly for those, and he uses our device on that. So I would just take Dr. William Pollack's advice on that. Atrial fibrillation, I do have a couple of people who've tried it for that. Purely anecdotal. One of them is a clinician, a chiropractor, and they tell me that it's helpful, but we're talking just one or two. So I don't know if other people tried it, didn't help, and then I didn't hear from them. Lyme disease. There are probably 3 clinicians now who think that this is an essential part of their treatment for Lyme disease. So they do like a nutritional support, and then they add the, PEMF or the system that I offer, and they say it actually enhances the effectiveness of their other treatments. So I think one of the best ways to think about PEMF is it's like the Uber, adjunct treatment. Every clinician I talk to says that PEMF, which includes my system, but it includes others too, right, seems to make their treatments 2 to 3 times more effective. So whether it's nutritional, stem cell, low-level laser light therapy, acupuncture, IR, all of these things seem to work better. And we've actually done some studies where even post-surgically, and the recovery is 2 to 3 times faster. So encephalopathies or brain swelling from infections, don't know. And I'm always concerned about dealing with infections, although the scientific literature suggests that PEMF doesn't make infections worse. It kind of has a slight, but maybe not statistically significant improvement on infections. Autism, I have a number of people asking me about that all the time because it's such a big deal now. And I've never gotten any good feedback. So I can't really say. Traumatic brain injuries, on the other hand, I can say categorically. We did a study with William Pollack and here with my colleagues who are neurophysiologists. We studied 8 people with traumatic brain injuries using this other device that I co-invented, the brain gauge, to measure people's brain function. We also tested them clinically, and we found that using our PEMF system dramatically benefited everybody on the whole TBI spectrum, from mild, chronic, all the way to really severe.
Is that published study?
Yeah, actually, you can find that on our website for brain gauge. It's at corticalmetrics.com. And if you want me to, I'll send you the link. Joe knows the link too. But if you just type in brain gauge, it's one of the studies we did in 2017. You just click on publications. I also have a link to it on our MicroPulse page in the M1 product. Brain fog, Joseph knows a lot more about that than I do. And Joseph tells me that it works great for that, and I believe him. Okay, Parkinson's disease is another one of these things where I'm sorry.
I guess back to brain fog. I guess most of his issues come from food sensitivity. So whenever he tries the ICES device, he puts on his gut, and once he gets rid of those food sensitivities, all the other issues he has tends to drop off, and he feels much better.
I really do think that there's something to that. So with this big whole systemic inflammatory response, if you can find the source of it and shut that source off, you can get a whole systemic benefit. And I think one of the mistakes people make with PEMF is that they tend to chase their problems around where they sense them. They sense the brain fog, or they sense pain or dysfunction. But really what you need to do is kind of try to find the source and quench that source. I think that's the case with brain fog. And a lot of these things have got brain connections, right? Parkinson's disease, I've had probably 3 or 4 people give me feedback on that, and they say, in every case where I've gotten feedback, they say putting it across at the base of the skull, behind the head, side by side, is very helpful. It helps people initiate movement, better movement control. Boy, I would love to study that, but it's just anecdotal. That's what people say. Hiatal hernia and mesh implants. I also put that in there because sometimes a lot of people have mesh implants. I can tell you that a friend of mine who has an MD, PhD, he's down in Houston, he had really severe meshoma from a hernia operation. And he actually used our device and was able to, he's the first person who's ever recovered from meshoma at the point where it's starting to cause multiple organ failure. First person in medical history, and he thinks it's the greatest thing. And like I say, he's an MD, PhD, but also that's an N of 1, so we haven't had a chance to really study it. We're trying to get collaborations with people, because when you get far enough along in the meshoma problem, it will kill you. Sleep. This is another thing that the model M1 is targeted for self-hackers. And in fact, I have an even more experimental version of the M1. It's like the M1X, where I've added a few, right now I've just got one complete one that actually is an extension of the delta wave that actually the device shuts off and goes to sleep for 40 minutes and lets you sort of relax, and then it turns on gently and through a delta cycle and turns off again. So it's discrete. And that seems to help people. Everybody who's tried it for that told me it helps a lot. Stroke and traumatic brain injury recovery seems to be helpful. Once again, clinically anecdotal, and a few people who are caregivers tell me that it's helpful. Migraine, I think we had that one, above a little bit. I talked about that. Prostatitis and benign, prostatic hypertrophy. I've had 5 different people, all 5 of them were clinicians, ask me about that. And one of the things they asked me for, because there's some papers published on it saying that about 4 pulses per second works really well, but higher pulse rates don't work as well. So one of the things I included on the Model M1 is a 4 pulses per second protocol that you can just use it. And in all cases, they told me that it was very, very helpful. And I actually have some data from some clinicians who were tracking, prostate markers, and it's pretty easy. You just sit on the coils, and you wear it as much as you can. Doesn't take a lot of energy, and they seem to have benefited. But once again, this is anecdotal. I didn't generate the data, but I'm hearing it from clinicians I work with. Increasing dopamine, probably in some way related to Parkinson's, maybe because you've changed the inflammatory state, and maybe the substantia nigra, which is where these cells are dying, that causes Parkinson's, maybe, but I don't know. Phantom limb pain, I haven't got a single data point to really tell you anything about that. Back pain of all kinds, it seems to be very helpful. Lots and lots and lots of people, 93% of the time, for back pain and chronic idiopathic pain in general. So 13 out of 14 people, it's very, very helpful. About 6 or 7% of the time, people don't respond. I don't know why. Might be because they're not using the device right. Sometimes, it may just be biological diversity and the different types of injuries. Their pain may be caused by something else. That's the one I feel really pretty strongly about. Another one that's not on the list here, but it's like idiopathic urinary incontinence. A lot of people, especially men, who have this problem. More women have the problem. One of these problems that nobody ever talks about. In every case where a person has asked me if this would help and then they've tried it, they had told me they've gotten considerable relief result. And I think that is because as we age, we get into our 50s and 60s, most of us have a kind of a low-grade chronic inflammation in the pelvic cavity. And that causes all kinds of different problems, from back pain, maybe sciatica, hip problems, urinary incontinence. Hollow organs don't are working as well. If you reduce the inflammation, my hypothesis is you don't have to regenerate nerves. You just simply reduce the inflammation, and then the whole neuromotor system works better. So you start to get regaining function and reduction and these other problems. Pain from cyst in the spine, I do not know. I think there was one case where someone had tried it and they said that it was helpful, but I don't know how much. I don't know if that was a problem. Root canal inflammation. We actually had a study that was in Egypt right before they had their Arab Spring, and we were doing for massive craniofacial reconstructive surgery where they actually have to reconstruct big parts of the bone of the maxillary arch. We found in every case that the healing after the surgery was 2 to 3 times faster, and the pain was reduced to almost nothing. So for craniofacial major things, it seems to really help reduce pain that results from surgery or other types of injury. As far as being complicated by an infection, you got to be careful about that. Stress, people ask me about that. A lot of people, it's really quite interesting. A lot of people have a deep relaxation response when they use our systems. I don't notice anything sort of psychological, but some people do, and I don't know why. It may simply be the interaction of the, inflammatory autoimmune system with consciousness. and mental state. And that one I don't understand. Some people tell me it's like the biggest thing for them, and others it doesn't seem to be a factor at all. I don't see that there. Yeah.
Does the device actually change the brainwave when they put it on?
Well, it seems to. Actually, a lot of people will tell me that it changes the state of their thinking. Now, I haven't done an EEG to verify that it's changing a person's brainwaves, but there's enough of a literature, to.
Just chuckling. Yeah, but we have the EEG, so we might actually try that.
You know what? Guys, try it and tell me, because what I really want to encourage people to do in the self-hacking community is try things and then tell me, because that's what I was saying at the beginning. The best information that I get is from people just like you guys saying, okay, well, I'm in the quantitative self or self-hacking, QS, whatever, community, and I'm going to go ahead and try it. I'm going to go ahead and measure it. And there are people who've told me, for example, people who've tracked their heart rate variability like 3 times a day, every day for like 3 or 4 years. And they're like, wow, it really reduces HRV, I'm like, cool. Yeah, I'd love to know that. But that's where I get that kind of data, right? So when people, they don't have any reason to fake it. They just are telling me what they're seeing. And I get the best information I'm getting that tells me gives me the biggest picture view of what it's likely doing system-wide is coming from people who are self-hackers, QS people who are doing these things. And actually, like one guy sent me a bunch, more than one, but one guy in particular sent me a bunch of graphs, his heart rate variability for like 3.5 years. He's like, look, what happened? So, atherosclerosis and clogged arteries, I don't know. That's one of these things that is probably a really long process that would take a long time to reverse it. Whereas like peripheral nerve dysfunction, it's something that be able to be corrected really quickly, because if you reduce inflammation, the nerve axons work a lot better, and within a few days you can see a difference. Other things, they seem to take a long time, and so like any kind of cumulative thing like clogged arteries, I would expect it to take a long time. Fungal infections, I can tell you from the PEMF literature, there's a suggestion that PEMF in general, especially about 10 hertz trapezoids, has a bacteriostatic, antifungal, antiviral effect that's small. It's not really potent, and I wouldn't think of using it, to fight the infections. But the message that I get is that it doesn't make things worse. It doesn't just non-specifically cause cells to, of all kinds, like, to propagate. It seems to have and this is done in vitro too. So in petri dishes, the number of colonies of things that are growing, they reduce fiber. Preventing colds and flus, no data on that. I think much about that. Boosting blood cell counts. Actually, when people use our system after cancer treatments that attack their erythropoietic systems where they're making stem cells, they bounce back very fast. And their oncologists ask them, gee whiz, you shouldn't be making blood cells that fast or that soon. What are you doing? And sometimes people will just say, well, nothing, because they don't want to admit to it. But I think what's happening is that it's accelerating the rate at which. So the question would be boosting blood cell counts if you're perfectly healthy and normal? Probably not. But blood cell generation recovery after radiation or I think there's something there, and I'd like to study it more. And people who've tried it have told me that they think it's very helpful. Obstructive sleep apnea as a nerve stimulator, I don't know. I know some people have played with it and tried different experiments, but they've never told me what the outcomes were. Can it help normalize the stress responses? I think it probably does at the autoimmune level, maybe or maybe not at the metabolic level, and maybe at the psychological level if you're doing like brainwave entrainment, but I don't know for sure. Does ICES have any cosmetic benefits or help with weight loss? Well, the best information I've ever gotten on that from one of your readers named Deb. If you just look at the SelfHacked website and look at the last interview I did with Joseph, she's made about a half a dozen comments in the last 2 weeks talking about that. She just sent me an email yesterday saying she had to change her pant sizes because she's lost so much weight. On the other hand, I don't hear that a lot. So I would think, if it really worked for that, I would be getting calls from like Oprah and everything. I hope I didn't just violate copyright or something. But I don't know, but boy, wouldn't that be interesting. And I think, you know, people's metabolic responses and causes of obesity and metabolic syndrome in general, right, which is more than just obesity, are probably complicated enough that some people will respond and some won't, and there'll be a whole spectrum in between.
Yeah. So
Okay.
All
we're
right.
about halfway through the questions. So do you want to take some audience questions now, Bob?
Yeah, I'm happy to take
Yeah.
any
So
question.
the audience, feel free to type in your questions, or maybe we'll unmute you. Let's see. You have trouble finding the chat boxes. You know, maybe while people are typing.
Can I talk a question, or should I type it in?
Sure, you can ask. Go ahead.
Okay, I missed that. I really apologize. I missed the whole first part of the webinar.
No problem.
Well, that's where we gave all the secret information. So
Exactly.
that's the most important.
I see that it's being recorded, so I will re-listen.
Yeah.
I don't know if this has already been discussed, but about the EMFs.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a concern about that?
Yeah, actually, I can talk about that a bit, and you might find this interesting. So you're talking about like electromagnetic smog, right? And
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So that's a big concern, and actually, I share that concern. A lot of the researchers I've talked to over the years are physicists and biophysicists who've been trying to study this problem, you know, probably 20, 25 years now. So just to tell you, you know, one of the main features of the technology that I've developed is that I've continued to reduce the power requirement. But what I keep doing is I keep cutting the signal in half, and I keep saying, okay, is this half of the signal giving the benefit, or is that half? And if I find that one half of the signal is helpful and essential and the other half is not, I eliminate that part of the signal. And I've done that now from about 1998, 1999. And as a result, I've reduced the total energy required to get the same or even a better biological response. I've cut 99.8% of the energy. If you were to divide the energy into 500 parts, I've eliminated 499 of them that I don't think are helpful. This is one of the big differences between me and the other PEMF marketers. Most PEMF companies don't have a scientist or an engineer really on staff. They're just kind of copying a design or something that somebody published a few years ago. But I've been trying to get this thing down to really, really low energy to have the same biological effect. Because I do think that electromagnetic smog is a huge problem, not widely appreciated. So I can tell you that probably the leading person in the entire world who her name is Magda Havas, and she's up at Guelph around Toronto. She's actually visited me a couple of times. And at first she was very afraid of PEMF, but Bill Pollock and I talked her into trying mine. So she actually uses mine now. She owns 3 or 4 of the systems. And she is probably more than anyone really aware of and sensitive to these problems. If you have a clean signal that doesn't have a lot of extra energy, it seems to be something that biologically is acceptable. So you think about it sort of like sunlight, right? If you get the right amount of UV, you get the right amount of infrared, you get the right amount of sunlight, it can be very beneficial for you. But if you get way too much sunlight energy, it can be very harmful. I kind of think it comes down to getting the right type of energy in just the right amount and not any excess. And then in that case, it can be very beneficial. And a very large percentage of the effort that I put into this design has been specifically to address that concern.
To follow up on that one, do you know if the ICES help with any responses or like bad reactions to EMF in the home?
Well, this is the thing. So a lot of people have asked, can ICES or any of these things shield you? So any of these PEMF devices, and some of them claim to shield you from background EMFs. I've actually tested that. And the answer, unfortunately, is no. The background EMFs just do what's called wave superposition, so all the noise in the background is still there. I don't think it shields you from it. As far as giving you a biological response that's helpful, that one's a maybe. Some people tell me it's helpful with their sensitivity, others not so much so. Once again, I think this is going to be something that's going to be sorted out by self-hackers who are sensitive. Who try really low energy PEMF. It may be just like any other type of allergy that a small, pure, controlled dose actually does help build tolerance. That would be wonderful. But I don't know in the case of this.
Okay. So,
and we have an audience question for Roxanne. Can you see the chat, Bob?
Let's see here, chat. I logged in at 12:30 Central Time.
Oh, I can read it. So I guess the first one is she wants to know more about the protocol on how to reduce brain fog.
That's Joseph's specialty. I think that you'd want to get that off of SelfHacked. I don't know.
Yeah, it's
he
like
places
this.
it on the top of his head, right? He stacks
Yeah, for the hypothalamus. So it's like on there, around the back of your head, like here.
You demonstrate on me.
Oh, is that what he does? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I had seen him actually stacking it on top of his head.
Just gonna try a few different ones, and you just put it like overnight when he goes to sleep, or like when he walks around. But in this house, it's not unusual to see people with different things on their head. Yeah. So try different points in your head, and then just do it like one night and go to sleep. See what happens.
If I may make a suggestion, right? So I've done everything that I can to reduce the energy in this thing, and the scientific studies I'm doing, especially where I'm studying it on controlled biological systems in a laboratory, what we find is that when you do something, you can have something biomedical. You can have a dose response curve that's linear, right? You double the dose, you get twice the response. Double the dose again, you get twice again the response. But that doesn't seem to be how PEMF works. PEMF seems to be threshold, right? Where you get nothing and then you get a response. But then more energy doesn't give you more of a response. I have really strong data to suggest that that's the case. And so the minimum threshold that you need is sort of on the low end of our devices. Now, some people rarely do require a lot more energy, but most people don't. And so if you're going to use it on your head, I recommend you start with really low intensity and also only do it while you're awake and alert. And you can see if you're having kind of an adverse reaction. I've had a few people call me up and tell me like, yeah, I bought your device. I turned it on to full power. I strapped it to my head. I never used any PEMF before. Full power strapped on my head and promptly went to sleep. And then I woke up 10 hours later and I was kind of groggy. I was like, don't do that. It's like a hot bath, right? You just ease yourself in, find your comfort level. But also, think about it. Don't think that more energy is necessarily better, because what I've seen in PEMF is really a threshold response. You kind of want to use just enough to get the biological response you want, and then more energy doesn't really give you much more.
So ADD, does it help with ADD?
I've had probably a dozen people ask me that, but I've never gotten good feedback, so I can't really say. It's one of those things I'd like to know.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So Robin asked another question: how long would you need to wear it for stress and relaxation?
Some people wear it at a very low energy, 24/7. Sometimes they put it on their lower back and they just get this really great sort of stress response. Some people wear it on their head. Some very prominent people who I can't even name, but if I did, you know their names, but I can't. Patient health.
Yeah. So
tell me they wear it, very frequently. Some people go jogging with it for an hour. Others will wear it discreetly all day.
So you
say you have to experiment with.
Starts from multiple hours to like all day, all night.
Yeah, so some people wear it. Most people wear it almost every day for at least a half an hour. For chronic, really deep-seated pain, I recommend you wear it for more like 8 hours if you can every day. Some people like it so much they just put the intensity really low and they wear it day and night, 24/7, 365. Never had anyone report an adverse reaction, and that's generally true of PEMF. If you look through the entire scientific literature, there's virtually no statement that it's dangerous. Even people who are strongly against PEMF, who are trying to debunk it, they'll even admit in their papers, well, it doesn't seem to hurt anyone. That's mostly because they think it doesn't do anything at all, right? But still, just out of an abundance of caution, and I just wouldn't want anyone to ever get hurt unnecessarily. Please start off while you're awake and aware with low energy and shorter periods of time, and then expand that to see how you respond. Right?
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
So if I was feeling stressed and I would normally like go meditate or want to take a nap, is this something I could wear and I could experience feeling more relaxed or is it more subtle than that?
It's very much more subtle than that. And the interesting story about that is that when we first started, selling them, a lot of people who had really bad chronic pain would buy these things. And then after a few days, they would say, it doesn't really work. Can I return it? And we would say, yeah, sure. Return it. It's not helping you. But what we'll normally tell people to do is hold on to it for a day or two without using it. Don't use it for a day or two, and then return it. And the reason is that the effects are so subtle, people don't notice them until they stop using it, right? And in every case except for one, people were like, whoa, hold on a second. It was really helping. I just didn't recognize it, right? In one case, the person said it wasn't really helping them, and they sent it back. So the effects are really subtle, and I'm not trying to make a device that makes you feel like you're getting some kind of deep massage. I mean, some of these PEMF devices are like literally powerful enough to cause, shocks to go between metallic fillings and stuff. We're not doing anything like that. We're doing really, there are cases where people will be wearing like a gold chain and you can see sparks and stuff.
Oh my
gosh. I'm just saying, I don't think it's necessary to do that. And so the only thing that you'll experience is you'll hear this clicking, click, click, click. And that's part of the physics of how the magnetic fields are changing fast enough to change the dimensions of the coils. Get rid of that. But most people don't feel anything. It kind of comes on really slowly. And it's when you stop using it after a brief period of using it, within a day or two, you tend to feel like, wow, because you're going back to the way it was. So yeah, it's not something like you'd feel right away, like a massage. You go, this is really deeply relaxed.
Cool.
It's much more so.
So we're going to ask more of the questions that people left, but if the audience has any other questions, feel free to type in and we're going to take a break to answer your questions. So Roxanne has a question.
Oh, here's one. So she says, as an athlete, do you recommend to use it on your muscles post-workout? So she says, if I have a heavy leg day, should I put out my legs after the workout? And will it help?
This is an interesting question, and we actually have some data on it. Dr. William Pollack was some of his patients were elite athletes and cyclists in particular. And they were finding that they were getting their best times on like cycling competition, shaving several seconds off of their best time ever. And these are people with very, very tightly grouped, performance, just by using, one of our earlier devices it was a generation 4 device from about 4 or 5 years ago. And they felt that their recovery was a lot faster, and that their performance was a lot faster if they would wear it during the actual performance of the event. I have not run these experiments, but that's what people are.
And another question from Robin. She says that you mentioned wound healing, and says, if the skin on my arms is extremely thin and breaks open very easily and is harder to heal, would it help? And how can you compare this to red light therapy?
I am trying to make a device that would do both. I would say that probably if she has a red light therapy device and has one of ours, what clinicians tell me is that when you combine those two for skin wounds, you get the very best possible outcome. So they seem to be good adjunct therapies, one and the other, probably because they're working on different mechanisms that impinge, that come together later to affect that. I can't say for a fact that it's necessarily going to help you in your particular case, but what I'm hearing is it's very helpful for skin wounds, and it also works well as an adjunct with other therapies. They include topical application of different things, and some people use like nitric oxide during gels and stuff like that, nutritional things. It's probably a pretty good adjunct.
Has there been any research to test whether the ICES reduce inflammatory markers in humans?
Yeah, so we've actually, I've actually done a couple of these studies, and it's really hard to find them because we're not seeing them significant above the background noise until we started doing studies on diabetic mice, right? And so this is something we'll probably publish this year. But we have very sensitive assays on these things called NOD, non-obese diabetic mice. And
Mm-hmm.
it dramatically changed, in some cases by a factor of 30 or 40, some of the inflammatory markers. And depending upon the intensity level and how we applied the field, we were getting an increase in some inflammatory markers and a decrease in others. And you have to understand that the inflammatory system has all these feedback loops, right? Sometimes an increase in a marker is there because the actual output is decreasing. And it's kind of hard to explain this, but it's the way feedback loops work. So if you think about like you're driving a car, right? And you're sensing the force you use to press so that's your marker. How much force, how many pounds do you put on the brake pedal? And in a functioning car, the number of pounds you put on the brake pedal will correlate to how quickly the car stops, how well it brakes. But if you cut the brake line, you'll notice that the car's not stopping, so you immediately press harder and harder and harder. So in that case, you get this tremendous signal, more force to brake from your foot, but the system doesn't respond that way. And so what I think is happening is that PEMF is breaking part of this inflammatory feedback loop. Sometimes pro-inflammatory markers will go up precisely because the actual inflammatory response is going down. So first, to answer your question in two phases, one is, we're starting to get some data on it now. And the second half is it's very complicated because sometimes we're actually seeing a reduced inflammatory response where we have a concomitant increase in an inflammatory marker. It's very interesting.
To follow up on their whole body mat question. So if somebody is trying to use the 2x2 arrays for the B5 or C5 models for whole body, so is there like a good placement for that?
Well, that's the thing. So the B5 and the C5 come with these arrays that are about 5 inches square on a side, and you can put 4 of them together. So you can make a long array that people sometimes put over their spine. Sometimes people place them differently. Like a couple of people have sort of a really, truly whole body swelling and inflammatory problem. They'll place one over each lung and then one over each kidney or something like that. Other people will just make a square mat. And then some people use it like if they've got a bad knee, another bad knee, a bad back, and one bad shoulders, and then completely different locations on the body. So the reason that we made the B5 and the C5 that way is so that you can literally just use Coban, self-coherent bandage or sports tape or something. You can make a pad whatever shape you really need. And just so that if you actually take apart some of these quote-unquote whole body PEMF systems with a big mat, really sometimes the PEMF coil is only about that big. And some of them are much lower power than ours. So they're actually probably, even though the mat looks like it's big, the whole bodiness of it is probably very limited.
So how long before your whole body mat might come to the market?
I'm not 100% sure we need one, because everybody who's wanted a whole body system and then uses I recommend the C5, because the B5 is really just for sort of like really for scientific experimentation. It's a little bit too complicated. You can get more use out of the C5, I think. But we've never had anybody who wanted a whole body system come in, then bought a C5. We've never had anybody come back and say, "Oh, that wasn't enough." Maybe that the C5 is just happens to be good enough. But I need to, it's something I need to work on more, because I don't want people to, I don't want to put something on the market that's not helpful, right?
Cool. So I read this question.
We have a question from Jane. Let me summarize it a bit. She says she went to a chiropractor and he recommended that she stop using the device, as she said the chiropractor said it was affecting her energy fields and that she was addicted to it. She also said that it also helped her pain a bunch, and then when she stopped using it, her pain came back. Is what the chiropractor said something to be concerned about?
Well, I would always be concerned, if your clinician is telling you something. I can tell you this about if people use our device as we describe it should be used. About 6 or 7% of people don't respond. About 93% of people for chronic pain, back pain, sort of something, respond really well. Of that 93 or 94%, if they use it for 2 or 3 weeks after the pain has stopped, it never comes back. So for, for like really long periods of time, months or even years. So a lot of people tell me that, for like, it can be like a microfracture in the foot or lower back pain or whatever. For 80% of the people who respond, they get kind of like a permanent relief. I am not one of those people. My back injury was really severe, so I'm kind of an obligate user of it. And I would say that, just my opinion, I'm not a clinician, just trying to be a regular, intelligent person here. Addiction is only a problem if there's really kind of negative consequences, right? So I think addiction may be too strong of a word. I think this may be something that that you need to have for the benefit that you're getting. I'm not happy that it didn't just fix you permanently and you can live without it, because I don't believe that people should be tied to a device. On the other hand, it's sort of up to you to decide were the benefits better for you overall than the negative aspects, which you're not telling me that it's doing anything negative other than the fact that you have to wear it, right? So I mean, if you have some kind of adverse side effects, first of all, I want to know about them, but yeah, you'd have to weigh it. And it's just like any other thing that they have in mainstream medicine, right? There's always side effects, and there's always, it's always kind of a trade-off, and you have to decide, is it worth it to you to have the risk of the device, whatever that is, and the inconvenience, and is that compensated for by the benefit that you get? And what I'm reading, in addition to local relief, there was whole body relief and well-being. He told you your energy levels were better. So then the question is, how little can you use it and get these benefits? And then the other question is it something that you have to keep using to get those benefits? And do you consider that a bad thing? It's kind of a personal choice.
So to add to that, I would hypothesize that maybe there's something in her body that is causing like a long-term cell danger response, and the ICES is somehow able to hijack that process and like improve it. But it's almost like if she needs to use it continually, then it might be that her body is still generating the cell danger response
it may
from
be,
other courses.
Well, there's a really good point that you make too, Nata, is that maybe there is a degenerative process that is being halted or reversed. And it may be, that you're getting immediate relief, but there's actually a reduction in this degeneration or maybe a reversal in this process that you're benefiting from that isn't obvious yet. And it may be that over a longer period of time, you'll find that you need the device less and less. And I will tell you this is another interesting thing. Is that the longer that I use the device, the lower I set the power and to get the same response. And many people tell me this, that once they kind of build up the courage to dial the power back a little bit, and that's why on the M1, it can be like 15 different power settings, 4 on the earlier devices. And that lets you kind of walk back away from the dosage that you need to get the response that you want. And ideally, you walk it down and walk it in. Eventually, you just don't need it anymore. And that seems to be the trend that I'm seeing for people, even if they have really, really refractory problems, is that many people they can get the same benefit with less time, less intensity.
Yeah. So now we have some contraindication questions.
I'd like to interject something if I could. This is Jane. And I just wanted to say about that the energy field measured as I was using the ICES just expanded in almost an unprecedented way. It was huge. And I just wanted to say that that was quite a curiosity to me.
I find it very interesting, actually. And, there's different ways of looking at this, right? It would be like, do you see that as a crutch where you have to use a device? But on the other hand, if you had that response from meditation, but you had to meditate to get that response, would you then conclude that you're addicted to meditation? And it comes down to a personal thing where, I would weigh the benefit that you have. And if you have a better overall sense of well-being, you don't have, adverse side effects, as long as you're okay with the device, it seems to me that it's something, you really have to weigh it for yourself to decide what's best for you. But I think your clinician's use of the word addicted is probably too strong, because most people have to go back to chiropractors 2 or 3 times a week for kind of forever. Are they addicted to chiropractic?
Okay. So, okay.
Roxanne asks, the M1 versus C5. Is the C5 basically the same but with more coils so it can form a mat if I want to? I just ordered the M1 because you suggested, but now thinking I should get the C5.
The C5 is identical to 4 M1s put into a package so that you can build a mat. So that is precisely correct. Now the M1 has fewer coils to drive, so there's extra memory available. C5 is maxed out. I can't add any more protocols. It's just, I'm not one of these guys. I'm not like holding something back, and then making you pay ransom to get the full functionality. I've always found that to be extremely, objectionable. You get the maximum that I can pack into something, and that's it. It's short. Now the C5 is already maxed out, but the M1, I'm able to add a few protocols, and I'm doing that over time. So the M1 will actually have a few more different protocols, but if you really need to have a mat, then a C5 might be better. On the other hand, a C5 does draw enough power that you kind of have to be plugged into the wall, and so it's not really mobile, whereas an M1 is so small. You can, some people wear it in a hat, or I wear it around in a pocket. It's like 52 grams with a battery in it and everything. It's like, half the size of a deck of cards. So it's ultra portable. So what you get with the M1 is that you can use it all day, all night, whenever you want, pretty much anywhere you go except swimming. Whereas the C5 is kind of like, when you can stay still and you're plugged into the wall. Some people have them both because they're doing different things with them. And I would say we don't like to sell the C5 or the B5 to anyone, especially not the C5, unless you know that you respond to it well. And so if you get an M1 and it's like, it doesn't really work for you, then you wouldn't want to have a C5 because it's the same thing times 4, right? But if the M1 works really well for you and you think it's a good value, then you can come back to SelfHacked and we'll have a discount code for you, and you can get a C5 at a significantly reduced price. And a lot of people who like it so much that they want to have one of each. Mm-hmm. I don't want to sound like a salesman. I'm just telling you that's what people do. But we don't want to sell you something that's expensive if it doesn't help you. So I would start with an M1.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So in their NASA study that tested the magnetic pulse effects on neuronal cells, they find that there's an increased expression in genes that are responsible for growth and regeneration. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if that's something that cancer patients should avoid.
Well, that's an excellent question, and many people, probably 150, 200 people have asked me that. And it doesn't seem to cause rampant cell growth. So if it did cause rampant cell growth, then you'd have two really serious questions, right? Cancer and sepsis, infection, right? Because if it's just making cells grow, you'd see tons and tons of cells growing, and it doesn't seem to be, as a primary thing, it doesn't seem to be causing cells to grow. It seems to be much more subtle, affects the environment in a way that healthy cells will tend to replicate and change the gene expression profile that they have so that it looks more like tissue in a growth and regeneration phase. Mm-hmm. You get a lot of extracellular matrix and other kinds of like adhesion proteins and stuff like that that allow tissue to rebuild itself. Now, when you look at the literature, and I used to tell people, absolutely, don't use PEMF if you've got cancer or an infection because we don't know what's happening. Many people simply blew off my concerns, went ahead, never heard any problems with it. And if you scour the literature, there's like nothing in the PEMF literature to suggest PEMF causes a problem with cancer or infection. And in fact, there's a fair amount of literature now that suggests that PEMF helps with it. In fact, one of the only 3 clinical indications for which PEMF is approved is for brain. You can look it up on the FDA website. Don't just believe me. So yeah, it's like for brain cancer, and it's helping with brain cancer. So obviously, it's not exacerbating, tumorigenicity or cancer spread. And there are plenty of papers suggesting that it's helpful for very aggressive forms of cancers as well. And it may be that these really aggressive forms of cancers are obligated to create and grow in a highly inflamed environment. And if you reduce the inflammation in that environment, it may actually reduce the aggressiveness of the cancer. That's sort of the hypothesis that I think people floating around. But there's not enough serious consideration of PEMF in the sort of oncology research area. Unfortunately, this is something that would be, there's so many animal models, there's so many opportunities to know the answer here, and I just don't see any serious, concerted effort on cancer researchers to figure it out.
What about someone with a pacemaker?
Well, I would be really cautious with a pacemaker, and I have told everybody with implants and pacemakers, definitely don't use PEMF. And of course, people don't generally follow my advice. They want to go ahead and try it anyway. We've never had a problem. Pacemakers are extremely well built to exclude external interference. So you don't see as many warnings as you used to. You used to have to be on microwaves, if you have in a public place, stay away if you have a pacemaker. But there's not a lot of reports of problems with that, right? And I know, probably 8 or 10 people with pacemakers who use our system. If you're more than about 5 or 6 inches away with our system, there's no measurable field, in the background, just like background electromagnetism if you're away from where you're treating. So I would never say that it's proven safe, because it's not proven safe, and you have to be really cautious with it. But with pacemakers, we haven't seen any problems, and we've never seen a reportable problem anywhere in the literature. Mostly this is because pacemaker design is excellent and very, very much excludes things. Now, as far as other implants are concerned, like titanium pins and different fixation devices that people have, screws, pins, and plates, we used to recommend that you don't use any form of PMF around them. Some people that I know very well said, yeah, whatever, we'll do an experiment. And every single time people say that it actually helps. At first, they'll feel for a day or two, they might feel tingling around the implant, like little tiny electric shocks. Not that it's uncomfortable, but they can feel it. And then after a day or two, that sensation goes away. And then within a week or two, what people tell me is that they feel like the implant has actually grafted better and it's more stable. So maybe what's happening is that some of the inflammation around the implant is reduced, and then the tissues, a better opportunity to kind of grab onto it and make it more stable. And that's what people tell me. So I no longer try to chase people away from using PEMF for these sorts of things, because there don't seem to be problems, and in many cases there seems to be some kind of benefit.
So James asked, what about the coil placement for rheumatoid arthritis, wrist and ankle pain? Should you use single or double coils per joint?
I would recommend self-experimenting, and everybody seems to respond a little bit differently. So the thing to do is try a coil placement for maybe 2 days, 3 days. Sometimes you'll get a response right away. Sometimes it takes a couple days. And then keep a little journal and say, okay, I had this protocol, this intensity level, and I put the coils on opposite sides of the wrist, or maybe stacked up over the wrist, or just one coil. Generally speaking, 2 coils where you're working is better than just one, like one coil on one wrist or the other. I'd recommend you focus in one area. And then sort of keep track of it for a few days, do something a little different for a few days, and try to get which coil placement works best for you. And once you do that, then you can start adjusting, the intensity and the protocol and see what works best for you. But in most cases, people sort of have to go through that self-experimenting phase to figure out what helps them the most.
So we have some clients with mast cell activation disorders. So the question is, does it activate mast cell if they have like really sensitive mast cells that are like activated in response to red light and things like that?
Absolutely don't know. That's the thing. Don't have any information on that. Sorry, I'd tell you if I did.
Okay.
I have a question. When you use a coil, how far does it penetrate into the body?
Well, it kind of sort of trails off, right? And so it's really hard to describe. I'm going to try to publish a paper on that this year. But it's the reason there's 2 coils is that you can use those 2 coils to form an electromagnetic field between the 2 coils. So you can have them side by side, in which case you get sort of a bagel-shaped field. You can have them on opposite sides, in which case you get like a football-shaped field between them with the small ends in each coil. Or you can have them stacked, in which case you get like a double mushroom shape. So a mushroom coming out of each end and then curling back around. And the penetration in the field concentration, it's if you have them on opposite sides, you can get 11 or 12 inches of tissue between it, and seems to get a really good biological response between them. If you're doing something superficial like on the ribs or so opposite sides is really good for like transcranial, transabdominal, transpelvic, lower back kind of stuff, or sections of like your leg or something, or even your knee. Sometimes you want them side by side, and you might do that over like a shoulder, lower back pain that's really just right in the spine, rib cage things. So how deep the penetration goes, it's kind of like you can't just say one number, right? Because it sort of peters out over time. But because magnetic fields are closed, they're not like a point source radiator, like a light or like something else. Because the fields are closed, you tend to get a pretty strong field in a really small area, and then it drops off as 1 over distance cubed or 1 over distance to the fourth. So you go a couple feet away, it's like there's nothing. And then if you're really close in sort of the magnetic flux loop, you get quite a lot of. It's different than like a light bulb.
Mm-hmm. Should someone with acute or chronic infection avoid using the ICES?
I don't know. I would be really cautious. There's never been a report that I know of that says that any form of PEMF exacerbates an infection. And I have been scouring the literature, and I can assure you that, the regulatory agencies, and they would be right to do so if like there was any kind of pattern where people use PEMF or electrical stimulation and their infections get much, much worse. That would be something you'd have to be really cautious about. There doesn't seem to be any indication of that. And in fact, very slight, barely statistically significant benefit. But I wouldn't think of PEMF or anything as being something you do to benefit an infection, but it doesn't seem to make it worse.
Uh-huh. Is it possible to overdose the ICES use? I think you touched on briefly, but
I don't think so. I've cut so much of the energy out, and it's so much less, extra excess energy than most types of PEMF that I don't think it's possible to. Some people use it at relatively high setting, 24/7, no problems. If you do overdose on any form of PEMF, it seems to be the thing to do is stop. And anytime where a person, like the only negative feedback we've ever gotten from any of our devices is that it makes tinnitus, ringing in the ears, noticeably worse in a very few people. And the answer was stop using it or turn it down. Problem went away. So we've, the only other thing was, like I was telling you earlier, people who've never used PEMF before, they get one of our systems, are really excited to put a battery in, turn it on, crank it all the way up, strap it on their head, and then go to sleep for a few hours. And they'll wake up kind of weirdly groggy, like, whoa, don't do that. Right? Sort of ease yourself into it. And I think based on my read of the scientific literature, it's very hard to overdose on PEMF. I think that's one of the most surprising things about it, because you would think people would be out there really hurting themselves with really powerful systems. And it doesn't seem to be the case. I don't see it in the literature.
We have an audience question. Roxanne says that in order to build muscle, it's necessary to have inflammation to break the fibers down and they rebuild even bigger. Is PEMF contraindicated for bodybuilding?
Well, I can tell you, I have a master's degree in kinesiology and sports science, and this is something I've actually studied. And when I kind of entered into this area, it's one of the things I was wondering about. And there's a lot of belief that inflammation is necessary for wound healing too. And yet we've done some studies where immediately in the recovery, right after surgery, we've applied PEMF, and wounds were healing 2 or 3 times faster, right? And there didn't seem to be any kind of delay or reduction or attenuation of the healing process, even though surgeons will tell you, especially orthopedic surgeons, you got to have inflammation because it's there. Well, they're right in the sense that it's always there after these injuries. And it does seem to be part of the healing cascade, but it doesn't seem to have to be there for very long. Do you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one thing. The other thing is that inflammation is a really big tent. And it may be that the type of inflammation that you need for eliciting there's a functional adaptation response. It's not just your muscles, but your tendons, your ligament, your cartilage, and your bones all respond to weight-bearing exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And high levels of exertion. It's well known, but you won't talk about as much. Talk mostly about cardiovascular and skeletal muscle. But all of these things, respond, and we do think that part of it is the mechanism of inflammation triggering this functional adaptive response. But it may be that NSAIDs interfere with part of that. It does interfere with functional adaptation, and EMF doesn't seem to. In fact, elite athletes who use it seem to think it helps to improve their performance. Let me tell you one of the secrets of the design of my system, ICES, the ICES system, that I actually designed it so that it would emulate the neuromotor pattern that you see during development of a fetus. So some slow twitch, some fast twitch. And what I was actually trying to do was emulate the neuromotor responses that are absolutely essential to promote tissue development and maturation. That's actually explains like the first several versions of ICES that have these, slower and then faster patterns. They're emulating slow twitch and fast twitch muscle. And if you study fetuses, they actually do this. They contract, and they do this kind of rhythmically as their musculoskeletal neuromotor systems are developing. So I think there's probably two mechanisms that are involved. One is this pro-regenerative, pro-developmental signal that is acting to promote and emulate, the signals that you see during tissue generation. And there's this other signal that seems to be reducing inflammation. And with EMF, it may or may not be interfering. I tend to think it doesn't interfere with this functional adaptive response. But once again, we don't know.
Cool. So now we have a set of comparison with other technology kind of questions. So what are the differences between ICES and PEMF?
Well, ICES is a type of PEMF. And since about 1974, well, let me put it to you this way. Online, I have posted how many different protocols you could have for PEMF, starting with waveform. Is it a sine wave? Is it a triangle? Is it square wave? Is it trapezoid? And then the different frequencies and the different ways of describing the waveform. And you can pull this off the internet. I've got it posted there on my webpage called the PEMF calculator. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. And if you do that, you come up with a number that tells you how many different types of PEMF there are. And that number is about 1 quadrillion.
Wow.
So it's huge. So if you know anything about chemistry, there's only between, it's maybe 10, somewhere between maybe 30 and 200 million possible chemicals in the known universe. So, so it turns out that PEMF is maybe hundreds of millions of times more diverse than chemistry. So, PEMF is one specific area in the electromagnetic spectrum, and ICES, the technology I'm developing, is a subset of PEMF. So it's sort of like saying, when people say, does PEMF work or not, that's sort of like saying, do chemicals work? Chemicals make you healthy. Only it's even 200 million times more complex than that, right?
Yeah.
So you have to ask, well, okay, what chemical are you talking about? Water, plutonium, testosterone? What are you talking about, right? And so PEMF is kind of the same way. And so what I've done with ICES is I've tried to take out all the extra energy in PEMF that does not seem to have a beneficial effect, and just keep with just the energy that seems to have this very narrow range of parameters that seem to be biologically beneficial, and that allows me to make it much smaller, much lower energy, which means the possibility for side effects, adverse effects, much lower, smaller, which makes it less heavy, less expensive, and because it uses less energy, now you can have a battery instead of having to be plugged into the wall. What ICES is, the way I think about it, because this is what I work on every day, is it's the most deeply, profoundly efficient way to get that energy delivered to your tissues without any extra wasted energy. And that's I would say that's the big difference.
Yeah. Other comparison questions. So can you compare between ICES and photobiomodulation?
I think they're different. I think the mechanism for photobiomodulation is different. And a lot of these things seem to go well together, like photobiomodulation and PEMF every time I've ever talked to a clinician who's skillful with both, they always tell me, you get a synergistically beneficial effect when you use the both. So I think they have different mechanisms acting biologically in a different way. And when you use both of them, you get the benefits of each one, plus you get this benefit of having the two at the same time. That's like a synergy.
Mm-hmm. And there are these devices like the Huda Clark devices and the German Beamer device. If you have heard of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would say that the main difference is that my technology is, honestly, it's just experimental, and I'm not claiming that it does anything for anyone. What I'm saying is that I'm doing experiments with it. People tell me it's helpful, and I make it available to people as an experimental device. So the big difference is, I think, first of all, there are technological differences between our system and theirs. I mean, I do PEMF differently than them, and kind of like, if I go more than a sentence or two into it, we got to start talking about calculus equations and stuff. There's real differences, right? But I think on the consumer end of the technology, the differences really are how I run my company. We spend $0 on marketing, branding, and stuff. We just talk to people like you guys and Joseph and stuff. We just try to tell the truth. Whenever somebody asks me about representing our technology, I always give them the same instructions. Tell the truth. All right. We don't have multi-level marketing. We don't have distributors. We don't have anything else. It's just my wife and I run this company. I run the company for fulfillment, and we take as much of the expense out of it as possible. On the other hand, I put a lot of money of my own resources into researching this. I think I spent in 2016, the last time I have complete records, about $850,000.
Oh, wow.
I spent developing the technology, which is largely defrayed by research money that I get and product sales. When you buy one of our devices, you're paying for components, you're paying for us doing the work, putting them together, you're paying for customer support, and you're paying for R&D. That's what you're paying for. You're not paying for flashy packaging. We send it in a simple box. You're not paying for marketing. You're not paying for any of that stuff. So that's kind of the big difference. And I can tell you this, I get many, many calls from people who own other PEMF devices. And they will tell me, gee, once I bought their system, they don't pick up the phone anymore. So many people ask me for advice about how to use these other devices. And I mostly have to tell them I just don't know. But I do get the sense that the after-sale customer support for a lot of these devices is pretty weak.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing because you guys swiftly respond to our emails and like anyone's questions actually, and you must get a lot.
Well, we do. Let me comment on that. The way I view it is, if anybody in the world feels the same kind of terrible pain that I was feeling, it makes you almost not human. You just get very grumpy, you get very angry, and when you realize the system is not built to help you, you get a sense of desperation. So I have a personal commitment. We answer the phone 24/7, 365. We take calls on Christmas Day. We take calls on major holidays. We take calls all over the world. We respond as fast as we can. Sometimes, it does take a day or two for me to figure out what a person's asking on an email, but we always try to respond. So we're doing our best to be responsive and helpful. And, I just don't see that. I would say that attitude does not dominate the PEMF market.
Yeah, and I have been interested in PMF technologies for a long time before I joined SelfHacked, and then they were just unaffordable. There were thousands of dollars, and the ICES is just within the price range that I could save up for. Yeah. So the question, so just wrapping up. So if people are interested in trying out the ICES, so where do they get it, and how much should it cost?
Well, I would start by going to SelfHacked, because I think you guys are going to give us, and we don't really work with anybody else at this point. We might meet somebody in the future. I can't guarantee it, but get a discount code from you guys. So we try to make sure that, there's a little bit in there, and then, that you can get discounted, right?
Yeah.
And so get that, and then you just go straight to our webpage, micro-pulse.com. micro-pulse.com, which I think you guys will probably put a link to it, and go straight to our products page. If you have any questions, you can email us, but then you can order. It's just a Shopify storefront, and we only take orders by the internet, so you can place an order there, and we do everything we can to fulfill that order immediately. So we don't have a fulfillment staff that works, once a week or something. It's like if we get an order early enough in the day and we have stock, and we'll try to ship it out the same day that you order it. So most people in the United States, if there isn't a weather emergency, will usually get stuff from us within 3 days.
Yeah. Okay. So how much do these units cost?
How much do the units cost? Well, let me start off with the first one I built for NASA was $74,000. And so a big part of like taking the cost out of, taking the energy out of them, I've also done everything I can to take the cost out. So I think I've been able to reduce the cost by like 99.9%. About 3 years ago, we had our biggest cost reduction I did a big redesign. We were able to reduce the cost from sort of around $1,500 to our current pricing, which is a little more than $400 for an A9 and a little more than $600 for an M1. And so we had another 72% price reduction. So right now I'm working on trying to get some benefit from mass production, but I'm not 100% satisfied yet with some of what we can get mass produced. The quality is not quite as good. See, I build each and every one of these things. So we test them thoroughly, so we know the quality is really, really good. And it's hard to find a manufacturing facility, even good, expensive ones, that will do that for you. So if I can find some way to take some of the manufacturing burden off of us, I'll, by designing it so it's simpler to build, I keep trying to drive the price down as well. But what's really kind of interesting, and I hate to say this, but people don't. A lot of the benefit that people get from this kind of technology is that they've actually invested something in it. If you put a few $100s into this technology, you actually tend to take the effort to figure out how to use it and get a benefit from it. What I've seen is that with similar kinds of technologies, if you get much less than a couple $100, people actually don't take it seriously enough to even try it. And if I want to be absolutely certain that a person won't benefit from one of our devices, we give it to them. And most of the time they're like, yeah, it didn't help me. It's really interesting. But if they actually bought it and they're like, I better take a few days and figure out how to use this thing, the vast majority of people love it. So I'm trying to get in that, I don't want to make it about money, but I'm trying to get into that price range that is most helpful of maximum number of people. You would think it would be free. Actually, it's not. There's some price where most people psychologically imbue the purchase with enough value that they take it seriously enough.
Right. Yeah. So you guys have come up with a really deep discount for us that you've never put anywhere else, right?
Yeah.
Do you like to go over those?
I'm actually not. I don't look at this as a business, so I'm sort of on the people and the technology end. But we will continuously, we're committed to continuously renegotiating with you. And I know Nada, my wife is working with you on this to find what's the best discount we can have. So I'd almost rather not say what it is here, because it may be better, right? If we can, actually take some of the cost out of building it, we'll just forward that to the customer, and you guys will see it as a discount. So the best place to find out the discount would be on SelfHacked.
Yes. So we'll put these codes on SelfHacked, and they will be available only for 30 days. And then in case the people are skeptical and they want to know if it's working for them and they just want to try it out, like what's your return policy?
I think we have a restocking fee, and I'm not sure what that amount is. Now, some of them, like the C5 and the B5, I build each one to order. So we definitely don't want you to buy it unless you're sure you want to own it. So you've already bought one, like an A9 or an M1 model, and it works for you. That's when you can think about buying the C5. We really do not like to have people try to return those, because they should know by the time they buy one that it's going to help them. But our policy basically is within 30 days, there's a restocking fee, which I believe is either $100 or $150. And that would be basically what you would pay to go to a clinic and get 1 or 2 treatments with a big PEMF machine, and you would know whether or not it helps you. So that's kind of the cost associated with figuring out if PEMF is going to be helpful to you. what we found when we had a smaller restocking fee is, once again, people did impulse buying. So we're actually trying to sort of psychologically help people. You're going to embark on this, be serious enough that you can absorb a restocking fee. What was happening is, if with a smaller restocking fee, people wouldn't take it seriously. They'd buy one, and then a month or two later, they'd say, "Yeah, I didn't really take it out of the box. I guess I really don't want it." And so this is one of these things that we try to do. We try to get the pricing, the restocking, and stuff, so that we're giving people the maximum opportunity to get the benefit that they need. The main thing that you get after you buy the thing is that we continue to support it. I mean, we do everything we can to fix problems. If somebody's broken something, we do, we don't make any money on repairs. We just, warranted for a year. Then after that, it's just pretty much what it costs us to fix it. So, we have kind of a long-term commitment, and that's priced into the device. But we don't want people to make, buyer's remorse. We don't want those kinds of things.
Yeah. So once they're using it, is there any other ongoing expenses like the coil or other things?
Well, so here's the thing. Some people ask me, why do you make these coils so cheaply? Well, I don't think of them as cheap. They're actually really carefully designed, but they're inexpensive. Like, I had one person on one of my YouTube videos say, "Well, you should have used a much better audio connector," and anybody in the audio industry knows that you should use a better connector. Well, sure, but it would have increased the price by a factor of 3. So the coils would be like $75 instead of $25. But we don't really have the connectors fail, so it's not really a problem. So if you make the coils heavier and stronger, they become more expensive and they become less comfortable and less convenient. So the design, the ongoing expense is that you do occasionally have to replace batteries. Right? And rechargeable batteries can only be recharged so many times, and then the lithium ones, they start to kind of expand a little bit, and whenever the battery starts to feel like it's puffing out, safe thing to do is replace it and get a new one. So I try to make it use the least expensive batteries that you can. Like the Model M1 uses these rechargeable camcorder batteries, and they're only $14 for charging batteries that last for months and months and months.
Right.
The coils themselves, think of it like a toothbrush, or like underwear, or something you only want to use it a certain number of times. It's best to get a fresh one, right? And it's the same thing with the coils. Some people can use them for over a year and they don't break them. Other people like me, I work in a machine shop and kind of dangerous environments, and they occasionally rip the wires out accidentally. So some people will break them in a week or two. Some people can keep them going for more than a year. Once you get used to it, it should last a couple of months. But I do recommend, it's like anything else that comes in close contact with your body, I recommend keeping them clean and every now and then replacing them.
I see. So now we're out of the questions that the audience or the readers left for us. So I just want to know if anyone who's attending live is interested in leaving the questions or asking questions right now. This is gonna give it a couple minutes for people to type, and then this is gonna wrap up this call. So I want to say thank you so much, Bob, for your time and for your passion and working hard on this device to help so many people.
Well, thanks a lot. And I want to just say thanks to the entire, SelfHacked community, because you guys have had a tremendous impact on my ability to understand how these devices are used by people and what people need for them to be useful. And much of my product development, as I was saying at the very beginning, is really focused on responding to what people are telling me. Now, that doesn't mean that every single request turns into a design change, right? But I'll get several hundred requests that are quite similar, and then I'll sort of technologically try to combine those into a change that would be most helpful for people. And I try every year to 18 months to come out with a new firmware or a new model that incorporates all the best changes that I've got.
Okay. All right, cool. So if nobody has any questions to submit live, we're just going to wrap up this call. So thank you so much and have a great weekend.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis.
Thank you, Dr. Dennis.
Bye.